Good afternoon. The Subcommittee on Oversight will now come to order. I want to thank each and every one of you for being here this afternoon. Hearing today, we deal with the whole question of charitable organization, whether charitable organization serve the needs of diverse communities. Today, the Subcommittee on Oversight is holding a hearing to explore whether a charitable organization is serving the needs of diverse communities. We have called this distinguished panel to help us examine whether there are better ways to identify, reach, and serve all Americans. Our country is growing. It is becoming more diverse, and we are a better nation for that diversity. These are people who share our values and share our hopes and our dreams. It could just as easily be you and I in need. One illness, one natural disaster, one accident, and we too could find ourselves in need. We must make sure that we meet the needs of our diverse residents, our diverse population. This is not an easy task, and we cannot do it alone. The federal government cannot be in every community, and the federal government cannot identify every community unique needs. This is the strength of nonprofit and charitable organizations. One thing is clear: our resources and the resources of the charitable community do not exactly match our needs. Sadly, those with the greatest need are not always served. We must ask the question, how well do we reach our diverse populations? The next question we must ask is, how can we do it and do it better? It is our challenge and our duty, our obligation, our mission, and our mandate to serve all people in need. This is a social issue. This is a moral issue. This is an American challenge. So today we call you here to ask for your help, your suggestions, your recommendation. We want you to speak openly, candidly, and be frank with all of us. So don't put your cards under the table, put them on top of the table, face up, and tell us what we need to do and what we all should be doing. Now I'm pleased to recognize the distinguished ranking member, my dear friend from Minnesota, Mr. Renstead, for his opening statement.
I thank my good friend, Chairman Lewis, for yielding and for holding this important hearing on the role of charitable organizations serving diverse communities. Very important topic. As we all know, for many years, the government, public charities, and foundations have been partners in helping those who are less fortunate. We often talk about expanding the social safety net for people in need, but we also must be sure there are no gaps in the existing safety net, that is, diverse communities being served. Just last month, our home state of Minnesota became a place of great need, as you all know from the press accounts. First, there was the 8-lane bridge collapse over the Mississippi River. Then there were deadly floods in southeastern Minnesota. Charitable organizations such as United Way, the Red Cross, and numerous others rushed to help victims of the bridge collapse, to help families in rural Minnesota cope with the floods. They donated time, money, goods, even their own blood. Ordinary Minnesotans joined the charitable organizations who provided the leadership in these efforts. But charitable organizations are not only good in disasters, they also respond in huge numbers to the daily needs of people of every background. These are needs that too many of us take for granted: food, clothing, housing, health care, a decent job, the basic needs of human beings. I'm pleased that Byron Lair and Marcia Fink from Minnesota are here today to tell us about how Greater Twin Cities United Way works with local charities to meet the needs of diverse communities. They do an especially excellent job of promoting the needs of diverse communities and serving those needs exceptionally well. I've worked with United Way for a number of years, and I certainly appreciate the good work that Byron and Marcia and everyone at United Way, Twin Cities United Way, does. Byron, Mr. Chairman, is Director of Public Policy and Jack of all trades, as he calls himself, at Greater Twin Cities United Way. He has also directed a narcotics rehabilitation program for Catholic Charities in Minnesota. So it brings a diverse background of serving people and is well recognized in our state as one of the true public servants, servant leaders. Marcia Fink is Director of Basic Needs at Greater Twin Cities United Way, and we thank Marcia for being here today. Marcia also has a long and distinguished career, Mr. Chairman, including 15 years with the region's largest chamber of commerce. Thank you for joining us, Byron and Marcia. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this hearing. I look forward to the testimony of this distinguished panel.
But thank you very much, Mr. Armstead. Thank you very much for your comments and for being here and being such a wonderful partner in this whole effort. Mr. Neal, would you like to make a statement? Mr. Richard Neal from the great state of Massachusetts, Springfield. Thank you for being here, Richard. Now we will hear from our witnesses. Ask that each of you limit your testimony to 5 minutes. Without objection, your entire statement will be included in the record. I will have all of the witnesses give their statements, and then members will ask questions of the panel. It is now my pleasure and delight to introduce our first witness, Dr. Julian Wolpart of Princeton University. Thank you very much, sir, for being here.
Thank you for asking me to participate, and I want to congratulate the subcommittee chair, the members and staff for their decision to focus on the important issue of charitable responsiveness to diverse communities. The topic of American generosity expressed both through charitable donations and through willingness to support public sector safety net and social programs has been very prominent in my recent research. The time allotment today will allow me only to present a very brief synopsis of findings. My research has shown that charity and voluntarism in the United States is largely confined within social, ethnic, racial, religious, and localized communities with little leakage to the stranger, except for short intervals at times of crises. The needs of diverse urban and rural, majority and minority communities are largely invisible to donors unless highly publicized in the aftermath of major tragedies like Katrina. To the degree that our diverse communities are flush with resources, for example, Princeton alumni in the financial sector, we need be little concerned with the responsiveness of nonprofit organizations to their needs. However, if diversity is defined as synonymous with concentrated poverty and social needs, for example, among recent Hispanic and Asian immigrants, Native Americans, inner-city black poverty zones, the rural South, then charitable organizations are woefully short of resources commensurate with needs. Little charity or voluntarism passes from wealthy suburbs to inner cities or rural areas or regions like Appalachia. Local charity in those needy communities, no matter how generous, makes only a small dent. My estimates show that only somewhere between 10 to 30% of charitable contributions are targeted to the stranger, that is, outside one's own social group and locale. We live and work in communities highly segregated by income, race, and ethnicity, and have little contact with the other. Charity remains circumscribed within class, ethnic, and racial boundaries. The poor and members of diverse communities and their needs are not prominent to donors. Contributions are overwhelmingly local: church, arts organizations, alumni organizations, etc. No clearinghouse or invisible hand operates at national or local levels to ensure that donations are adequate and well targeted to where they are most needed. That is, the process is fragmented and atomized. Targeting decisions are made largely without rigorous analysis of social needs and priorities, and little attention is devoted to monitoring and evaluation of the services that are supported. Furthermore, contribution levels are based more upon donors' ability to give than on levels of need. Now, charity has been highly effective in enhancing quality of life and the variety of educational, civic, cultural, and health services available in the American population as a whole. However, the targeting is not charitable in the sense of distributional equity, that is, consistency of allocations with a distribution of fundamental social needs among our diverse communities. Our systems of charitable institutions and tax deductibility for contributions are highly cost ineffective as mechanisms for redistribution of household income or social welfare. The losses in federal and state revenue from charitable deductions far exceed donor transfers to the needy. Redistribution has been demonstrated to be far better through government appropriations than through tax remission or deduction measures. Now, the historical evolution of the charitable sector in the U.S. shows growing recognition that government bears a major responsibility. On the other hand, charity and philanthropy have reserved the role of first response to crises, development and testing of innovative service programs, and advocacy for enhanced quality of life and greater inclusiveness in the American dream. Now, this is not a bad division of responsibility if done well. I want to briefly describe a recent case study from research in New York City. It was a study of access, responsiveness, and coverage of nonprofit services in New York City. It showed a high degree of unevenness and a number of significant gaps. First of all, the middle and upper income communities have a very dense network of civic groups and services that go along with it. There's a strong preference given by nonprofit providers to downtown locations for the convenience of staff and board members, much to the detriment of people in the neighborhoods who really need the services. There's been a slow response in extending coverage of nonprofit services to neighborhoods that are experiencing rapid demographic and social change. There are significant service gaps in communities with large numbers of recent Hispanic and Afro-Caribbean immigrants. Service gaps in poverty neighborhoods are attributable to a shortage largely of government contracted programs because in those communities there is virtually no charitable support of the services that are provided. Those nonprofits are reliant for 80 to 90% of their revenues upon grants from federal, state, and local government. Next, much greater financial failure, that is bankruptcy among nonprofits in poverty and immigrant neighborhoods due to failure in finding diversified funding resources. Now, we can expect only modest changes in the margin, at the margin of the level and targeting of charitable donations. I've learned something valuable through prayer, that if you expect decent results, you want to give God a decent break, and you want to pray for something that's consistent with natural law or human nature. Don't pray for things that are unlikely to occur. And for this reason, I believe strongly that any changes in our charitable system are likely to occur only at the margin with modest incremental forces. The nonprofit sector is strong. It does a good job in many of the things that it does, even if it isn't charitable, and it has strong friends in Congress. Okay? So I'm not expecting to find major changes to occur, but I'm going to talk only about incremental changes. Progress in some metro areas has been achieved by making the needs of the communities more visible through regular needs assessments and inventories of service gaps. Make them more visible. Next, taking advantage of natural and man-made catastrophes that uncover long-standing service needs.
Doctor, if you could summarize, I tended to let you go over your 5 minutes because you intervened. You had the divine to intervene there for a moment.
Okay, all right.
And I didn't want to interfere with the divine, but...
He's no longer with me, huh?
okay. Okay. So your 5 minutes is up. If you can just close it out.
Okay. The rest of my statement largely makes recommendations for redefining needs, not necessarily through diversity, but through categories. For example, serving those who have health problems associated with being poor. And so the need is targeted, or the campaign is targeted toward groups who have high incidence of stroke and diabetes, rather than necessarily with the ethnic communities. And anyway, so the rest of my remarks are mainly suggestions of what can be done at the increment, at the margin, in order to improve the distribution of charitable resources. Thank you.
But thank you very much for your testimony. Your entire statement will be placed in the record. Our next witness is from the Urban Institute. I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Elizabeth Boyes, the Director of the Center on Nonprofits. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Chairman Lewis, Ranking Member Ramstad, and members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to testify today. At the Urban Institute, I direct the Center on Nonprofits and Philanthropy and also the National Center for Charitable Statistics, where we collect data on the nonprofit sector and make it available for research. The topic today is an important one. A unique civic culture exists in the United States, largely based on giving and volunteering to improve communities in a variety of ways, by solving problems, preventing harm, generating knowledge, promoting civic participation, and much more. In my testimony, I cover 5 questions. In my 5 minutes, I'll only have time to touch on each. Surveys reveal that people of every economic, racial, ethnic group give and volunteer. They also create organizations. The most widely used source, Giving USA, says that total donations for 2006 equal about $295 billion. We're talking about who gives how much and to whom. An estimated about 10% of contributions went for human services organizations, but this is clearly not the whole story. Nonprofits are partners with government in providing many human services. Government is estimated to provide about 30% of nonprofit revenues through grants and contracts and a variety of human and health-related services and others. So government shapes where most nonprofit contributions are really used. Compared to the government sector, however, the nonprofit sector is small. Nonprofits receive about 2% of personal income, government about 25%. The nonprofit sector is not a system. This echoes Julian's comments. Rather, it's a fragmented mosaic of mostly small organizations. 61% have less than $250,000 in revenue per year. And fees for services are increasingly important sources of support. Contributions are a small but vital part of nonprofit revenues, about 12%. Who benefits from these contributions? All nonprofits and donations to them must serve public purposes, broadly defined. Breakdowns by population groups are difficult to document. The information is not required on tax forms or public disclosure documents, and many types of activities are really for public benefit. A new analysis by the Center on Philanthropy at Indiana University estimates that about 31% of individuals gave to nonprofits that explicitly address the needs of the disadvantaged. If contributions from foundations and corporations and estates are included, that total is about 23%. These estimates are the best we have at the moment, and they're cobbled together from a variety of sources. You can't go to one place and find this data. In terms of charitable beneficiaries, preliminary results of a study of my institution shows that about 90% of nonprofits serve at least some low-income clients. and that for a quarter of nonprofits, their low-income clients range between 75 and 75 and 100% of those they serve. So about 40% of nonprofits focus on economically disadvantaged, with half or more of their clients, but fewer nonprofits serve that proportion of ethnic and racial populations. 70% of nonprofits, according to this survey, serve half or more white clients. Foundation beneficiaries we get from a sample that the Foundation Center collects. It's the largest 1,100 or so foundations, accounting for about a half of foundation grants. And from there we learn that about 15% of foundation grants serve human services, education about 24%, arts and culture 13%, health 21%. Well, what does this mean? About half of the foundation grants are for the general public. They're for the general good. We have no way of determining who they benefit. And one might say that the indirect beneficiaries of those foundation grants might be more important in some senses, if it's research or prevention, than the direct beneficiaries, vaccine development or pollution control, et cetera. So there's very little public data available on the outcomes of nonprofit programs or of foundation grants. Yet this information is what we are really required to assess if we want to understand the underlying question of who benefits from charitable contributions. How do charities and foundations identify community needs? There are lots of ways: surveys, mostly, focus groups. There are all kinds of things that I'm sure our folks from Atlanta will talk about. The National Neighborhood Indicators Project is one way of neighborhoods collecting data and making it available. The weakness of needs assessment is that it's not done uniformly, and that really finding the resources to conduct needs assessment is very difficult. Fifth, are there gaps between needs and services? And there are undoubtedly gaps, especially for the poor. Charities that provide basic human services, largely funded by government, and the government itself only spends 2 to 3% of its budget on the underserved. The makeup and needs of the poor are not uniform across the country. Neither are nonprofits. Contracts with charities often don't provide overhead, so that in order to make ends meet, they have to go out and raise additional revenues. There are all kinds of things that we could do to try to fix that problem. Fifth, how do we improve the quality and scope of data on nonprofit beneficiaries? First, we can mandate electronic filing of Forms 990 and revise that form. They're very high on my agenda. We use those data all the time. And we also have software on our website to help nonprofits fill them out. But even with these enhancements, the sector requires an investment, not only from those of us in the nonprofit sector, but from government, in systematic data collection and an integrated sector information system. As this testimony demonstrates, we can piece together plausible stories from surveys and data from all kinds of sources, but it requires a Herculean effort and lots of time and money. And the results that we find have to be heavily qualified. If knowledge about nonprofits is important to public policy in this country, we must have the resources for creating, maintaining, and making accessible data on the nonprofit sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I'm pleased now to welcome Kevin Brown from the American Red Cross, the Chief Operating Officer. We will not hold it against you, Mr. Brown, for stealing our former RS Commissioner. Wish him well.
I will. Thank you.
Well, thank you. We're very pleased to have you here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm delighted to be here today on behalf of the American Red Cross. Ordinarily, as you mentioned, Mark Everson, our President and CEO, would be here in my place. Unfortunately, he had a previous commitment that does not allow him to be here today. For the American Red Cross, our mission is defined by our congressional charter to help our nation prevent, prepare for, and respond to disasters. Diversity is important to us because our mission is to help all, not some. Our services are only beneficial if they reach those who need them. We must ensure that the American Red Cross is reflective of all the communities we serve. Okay. We realize that not all people turn to the Red Cross as their first line of defense when disaster strikes. For many, they turn to who they know and trust, be it their church or a local nonprofit or civic organization. This was certainly true during Hurricane Katrina. Because the need was so great, hundreds, if not thousands, of local churches opened their doors to help their neighbors. Other local nonprofit organizations those that typically would not be in the disaster response business, were selflessly giving all they could to care for people. Several advocacy groups observed that we did not consistently meet the needs of diverse communities, that we lacked diversity in our staffing and volunteer ranks, and that we had not done enough before the storm to foster the right relationships with local and national organizations that serve diverse populations. We have taken this criticism to heart. To this end, we have been working diligently over the past 2 years to partner with many new, non-traditional disaster response organizations well before a disaster hits. An example of this would be the Vietnamese fishing community in the Gulf Coast area. This community was not familiar with the Red Cross, and after Katrina struck, they turned elsewhere for assistance. Unfortunately, we did not know where they were or what their needs were, and it took us days to reach them and provide needed resources. We now have an agreement in place with Boat People SOS, a nationally recognized group that assists Vietnamese refugees and immigrants. Just this past weekend, as a tropical depression threatened the Gulf Coast, our local chapter in New Orleans activated their agreement with Boat People SOS, who was charged with running the Plaquemine Parish shelter in partnership with the Red Cross. Similarly, over the past 2 years, the Red Cross has trained over 1,100 volunteers from the NAACP to provide essential relief services, and they have deployed with us during several recent storms. To be sure, while such partnerships have proven useful, they are not the sole answer. For instance, the Red Cross needs to make further significant improvements on the staffing front and in our volunteer base. I want to touch on one other point as well. In addition to disaster preparedness and response, the Red Cross also collects, processes, and distributes more than 40% of the blood used in our country. We know that we need to improve the recruitment and retention of diverse blood donors for a couple of reasons. The first is that only 8% of eligible donors donate blood each year. Secondly, donations from diverse communities can help with specific needs like sickle cell anemia. Increased donors will help to alleviate these needs and contribute to a safe and available blood supply. I would also like to acknowledge and thank my fellow panelists for their long support of the American Red Cross. The Ford Foundation has been a tremendous partner in helping us improve our post-disaster service delivery mechanisms, providing millions of dollars in support of these efforts. The Community Foundation of Greater Atlanta was a strong supporter of our disaster response efforts during Katrina and is a consistent supporter of the American Red Cross of Greater Atlanta. And the Twin Cities United Ways is a strong supporter of disaster relief and local Red Cross community initiatives in the Twin Cities. We are grateful for their friendship and continued support. As you all know, there were some leadership changes at the Red Cross earlier this year when Mark Everson took over as our new president and CEO. New leadership provides new opportunities. I can tell you today that the Red Cross must do better in understanding that diversity is a strategy that can enhance all aspects of our mission. Successful diversity initiatives result in better client services, increased staff and volunteer talent pools, stronger and more meaningful partnerships, and increased financial and blood donations. Together, I know we can make the Red Cross the strong, diverse, and inclusive organization it should be and that all Americans expect it to be. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I'm pleased now to welcome our next witness, Susan Beresford, the president of the Ford Foundation. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Chairman Lewis and members of the subcommittee, thank you for holding this hearing today. I was asked to explain how the Ford Foundation makes allocations, who makes those decisions, and to give you some examples of the programs we support. Ford's mission is to strengthen democratic values, reduce poverty and injustice, promote international cooperation, and advance human achievement. We commit 75% of our U.S. funding to the reduction of poverty and injustice. In the last fiscal year, this totaled about $220 million, and since poverty disproportionately affects women, minorities, immigrants, and people in rural areas, they are at the center of our work. Most of Ford's work could be called strategic philanthropy addressing root causes. This differs from charitable philanthropy that addresses immediate needs such as hunger or homelessness. We provide risk capital for pilot programs, for research, and for people tackling systemic injustice in education, housing, and other areas. How do we make decisions at Ford, and who makes them? Ford's trustees set program, policy, and policy in other matters. Among our trustees who are U.S. citizens, 40% are minorities, 23% are citizens of other countries, 62% are women. The next president of the foundation, Luis Ubiñas, will be the first Hispanic president. I was the first woman president, and my predecessor, Franklin Thomas, was the first African-American president. 46% of our professional grant makers are minorities. Together, the board and program staff, with help from outside advisors, explore ways to help solve problems that fall within our mission statement. And ultimately, the board approves our grant strategies and then allocates funds to those strategies and offices, and then they delegate to the president the authority to approve grants. Now let me give you some examples in 4 categories. First strategy, we believe that people really matter, and so we try to ensure diversity in the talent pools from which the U.S. draws leadership. Since the early 1960s, the foundation has given over $175 million to the largest private philanthropic program of fellowships that promotes diversity in the American professoriate. The Ford Diversity Fellows Program has given fellowships to approximately 5,000 scholars from rural and urban areas. Most now hold positions in academia. 55% are African American, 38% Hispanic, 6% Native American. Community colleges enroll more than 50% of Latinos and 40% of African Americans in higher education in our country. And since 1966, we've provided about $33 million for these institutions. We help them improve the way student credits can be transferred upward in the system, how to keep tuition low, and how to foster the community colleges' collaboration with schools who send students to them and employers who hire them. Second strategy the foundation has is to give low-income people a chance to build assets, not just to earn income. Ford committed $50 million as a guarantee so Fannie Mae would purchase mortgage loans made to families with low income and low credit scores. This leveraged $4.3 billion from Fannie Mae and created 50,000 new homeowners in low-income families, 44% of them minority and 15% in rural areas. They have outstanding repayment rates. Manufactured housing, as you know probably, accounts for 2/3 of all rural housing starts. But manufactured homes in mobile home parks often fail to create a lasting asset the way other homes do. So Ford invests in initiatives that enable people to buy the land their mobile homes sit on, to improve the structures and to raise building standards. Another asset strategy we invest in is for low-income families is children's savings accounts. These accounts are seeded at birth by investments from government and nonprofits. They build up over time by private savings and public contributions. They can be used after 18 years of age to pay for college or school fees or invest in a down payment for a home. We fund a national demonstration program in 11 sites around the country that is working on this idea, 1,300 accounts, 78% of which are held by minority children. And since 2005, several bills have been introduced modeled on this program. We think it's a very exciting thing for national policy. Third strategy, Ford has also provided decades of funding for legal advocacy organizations that establish standards of fairness in America. The NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, and the similar defense funds for Puerto Rican groups, for Native American and Asian American groups. Since the 1950s, we've invested over $265 million with these groups. We also support voter registration and education. The last area I want to note quickly is the field of philanthropy itself. Ford supports grant-making associations that foster greater funding for minority communities, minority leadership in philanthropy, greater funding for rural communities and rural leadership. There are groups like the Hispanics in Philanthropy, Native Americans in Philanthropy, the Association of Black Foundation Executives. I think you have before you a timeline that shows 70 years of the Ford Foundation's funding for topics of this sort. It displays many more examples than I was able to give, and we are just very proud to have the diverse partners that we have reaching into the diverse communities in America. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Our next witness is from the great city of Atlanta. Please welcome Leslie Grady from the Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta. She is the Vice President of Community Partnership. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of the subcommittee, Thank you for the opportunity to appear before this subcommittee to discuss how charitable organizations serve the needs of diverse communities. As Vice President of Community Partnerships, I am responsible for our grant-making, community leadership, and education of our donors. The Council on Foundations, a membership organization of more than 2,000 grant-making foundations and giving programs worldwide, recently created national standards for community foundations. It defines a community foundation as a public charity with the long-term goal of building permanent funds established by many individual donors for the benefit of residents in a particular geographic area. We make philanthropy happen by connecting donors, nonprofits, community leaders, and institutional partners at the same table. Community foundations exist all over the world. They account for 1% of all U.S. grant-making foundations, but almost 9% of giving. The Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta serves a 23-county region, including the urban core of Metro Atlanta, suburban areas just outside the perimeter, and exurban and rural counties as well. We provide funding to nonprofits through local funds, donor-advised funds, competitive grant-making programs, and strategic initiatives targeting specific community issues. The Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta ranks in the top 10 of community foundations by total giving and in the top 20 for asset size. Yet while these numbers provide a statistical background for the power of community foundations, the real power comes from connecting people and ideas to make our communities stronger. One of the most important ways we reflect diverse communities is by having strong, diverse governance. The Community Foundation's board nomination and process identifies persons reflective of the community's demographics, using primary indicators such as race and gender, but also ethnicity, geography, socioeconomic background, profession, religious, and political affiliation. Our staff as well reflects more than 7 nationalities and is diverse by age, religion, sexual orientation, political affiliation, marital status, and education. One of the main roles of a community foundation is to provide services to donors. We make philanthropy easy for our individual and family donors so they continue to support charitable organizations. But the most important thing we do is to educate and engage our donors. One of our donors' family came to us with several passions. The father had grown up in foster care and was interested in supporting youth in need. The children were interested in animal welfare, and the entire family wanted to support a faith-based organization. We introduced them to a unique nonprofit called Noah's Ark, a facility serving as a home for abused children as well as a rehabilitation center for wildlife and abused animals. The foundation brought 11 intergenerational members of this donor family from the suburbs of Atlanta to rural Henry County to visit Noah's Ark, and as a result, the family recommended a $25,000 grant. The Community Foundation also supports diverse populations through our grant making. We have local affiliates in 5 counties and regional outreach staff who work in the counties furthest from us to better engage and understand their needs. For the past 16 years, we have implemented the Neighborhood Fund, which provides small grants to resident groups of 5 or more, as well as a personal coach to assist them to improve their communities. Neighborhood Fund grants are awarded for projects such as neighborhood cleanups, seniors walking clubs, voter registration drives, and more. The foundation stays connected to the region's changing population by bringing diverse groups to the table to talk about the issues in our region and figure out how we can pool resources of time, expertise, and assets to create potential solutions. Since the time it was called GRID, Gay-Related Immune Deficiency, the Community Foundation has been involved in HIV/AIDS by providing more than $9 million in grants as well as strong community leadership since 1981. Through partnerships with major institutions such as the Ford Foundation, our local United Way, and our donors. As the issue has changed and new HIV infection is now concentrating in people of color and people who are poor, homeless, and incarcerated, we have renewed our efforts and recently established a leadership team of the AIDS Fund to provide focused, strategic attention to the issue. This team is co-chaired by Dr. David Satcher, former U.S. Surgeon General and a board member of the Community Foundation, and Sandy Thurman, former Director of National AIDS Policy under the Clinton administration. Finally, the Community Foundation conducts research on the critical issues addressing our community. We sponsor global snapshots produced by the Atlanta Regional Commission. These publications profile various ethnic communities, their demographics, their customs, economic impact, where they live, and the organizations that serve them. Recent snapshots include profiles of Cubans, Bosnians, Ethiopians, Iranians, Japanese, and Haitians. Other recent research efforts include a study, Giving a Shared Inheritance, to understand the patterns, trends, and motivations of African American philanthropy in Metro Atlanta. We also did recent research on the intersections between health and homelessness. For all of our research, we go directly to the sources, service providers, public officials, as well as persons impacted by the issue. We take all of this knowledge and use it to inform our grant-making, leadership, and education of donors. The Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta is not unique. We are one of more than 700 community foundations in this country that all strive to fully represent the dynamic and diverse communities we serve. It is a constant learning process, but the only way we can be successful, we know, is by truly representing the diverse voices that make up our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I'd like to recognize the ranking member, Ms. Ramstad, for presenting our last two witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again want to welcome and thank the two representatives here today from Minnesota from the Greater Twin Cities United Way, Byron Lair, who's Director of Public Policy, and Marcia Fink, who is Director of Basic Needs. Thank you both for being here, and look forward to your testimony. Reel back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, members, thank you. Good afternoon, and wanted to acknowledge my appreciation for the opportunity to address you. Our United Way serves 9 counties in Minnesota, encompassing the metropolitan area of Minneapolis and St. Paul. A few statistics about our community. The Twin Cities population is 2.7 million people. Our median income is $57,000, and 50% of our population is people of color. Our service area encompasses all of Minnesota's 3rd, 4th, and 5th congressional districts, plus significant parts of 2 and 6. Our United Way is the 2nd largest in the country. Last year, we raised $86 million and invested in 450 programs through 200 agencies to advance the common good. Marcia Fink will describe what United Way is doing to help people meet basic needs: food, housing, job training, transportation, and more, and to support their efforts to achieve financial stability.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Congressman Ramstad, and other honored members of this subcommittee, thank you again for the opportunity to be here today. I'm the Director of Basic Needs, which is one of 3 impact areas at Greater Twin Cities United Way. Our service area, the Greater Twin Cities of Minnesota, includes St. Paul and Minneapolis, and it's becoming more diverse each year. We have one of the largest concentrations of Hmong and Somali in the United States. In Congressman Ramstad's district, nearly 10% of the population is foreign-born, and of that 10%, nearly all of those are Somali. In order to serve a very rapidly changing population, United Way supports a 211 information and referral call center. This service provides referrals for people in need of food, shelter, job resources, health care, child care, and many more things. The service is multilingual, offering Hmong, Russian, Somali, and Spanish translations. It's staffed 24/7, and it's a free service for anyone calling in needing help. We have one of the largest 211 call centers in the country. Last year, our 211 staff made over 400,000 referrals. Half of those were for basic needs, such as food, shelter, utilities, transportation. Information being submitted for the record provides detailed caller demographics and more specifics. Okay, but for instance, 87% of our callers are female and 1/3 are single moms. 64% of our callers earn less than $20,000, and 60% of those calling 211 are people of color. We constantly strive to identify the most pressing needs in our community through sound research, focus groups, and surveys of those needing help. We use this information to determine how best to direct the donations entrusted to us. We routinely evaluate the effectiveness of all the programs and agencies we invest in. We review their services. We also review whether they are responding appropriately to changing demographics, changing languages, multiple languages, and specific cultural dynamics based on the gap which has been identified through our research. In the area of basic needs, which is one of the 3 impact areas at United Way, we invest over $15 million each year, including several programs in Congressman Ramstad's district. One of our partner agencies is Community Emergency Assistance Program, or CEAP. Basic needs programs through CEAP provided enough food to make meals for over 4,500 individuals, and CEAP has also helped over 1,000 individuals obtain housing. CEAP's clients are 60% people of color. United Way supports many programs centered around financial stability and helping low-income families break the poverty cycle. Research shows that many of our communities of color experience generational poverty. In our area, we had a disparities report that showed that African Americans and American Indians have generational poverty issues that exceed others. And so we've invested more intentionally in programs that serve those, and we have doubled the amount of investment in those areas. One of the financial stability programs at CEAP, the organization I just mentioned, is called Ways to Work, and it's supported by us, United Way. Through low-interest loans, the program helps low-income people purchase cars that allow them to get to work and be dependable employees. Let me just share one specific story that shows the difference that can be made through researched, effective programs that support hardworking, diverse families to get ahead. Crystal Williams is an African-American woman, wife, mother, and she's also a member of the Army National Guard. She was hired by her current employer as a shift manager, earning $9 an hour. She was ambitious, she wanted to earn more money, and she was offered the position as an assistant manager with a significant increase in salary. But that position required her to have a car. She was approved for a low-interest loan to purchase that car, and in June last year, she did purchase that car. She got a promotion, and she's now making $27,000 a year with benefits. It's made a huge difference for herself and her children and her family. Crystal's life is just one that was improved in a variety of ways due to a United Way agency and a United Way funded program. There are thousands of stories like these across America in more than 1,300 independent United Ways. United Way has a tradition of identifying the most pressing needs of our communities, like hunger, school readiness, job training, and the need for education and assistance with financial stability. And these issues, we know, mostly impact low-income individuals and families and communities of color. We partner with good programs and agencies to meet those needs, and we continually work to increase the resources available to invest in that work. Last year, we raised $86 million and in turn invested in 450 programs through 200 agencies. We always plan to do more each year. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you, and Byron and I will be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Thank each one of you. You've been so wonderful, so helpful. You probably heard the bell, meaning that we have votes. So we have a limited time, and I'm not going to answer any questions. I'm going to defer to the ranking member and take members on both sides. Mr. Ramstad,
Mr. Chairman.
maybe we will follow, rather than the 5-minute rule, maybe we can follow the 3-minute rule.
2-minute
Maybe
rule.
the 2-minute rule, okay? That's agreeable, 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, very briefly, Mr. Brown, as you know, before you and Mark Everson took over the leadership of the Red Cross, I chaired a hearing in the last Congress on the charitable response to Hurricane Katrina, which revealed some serious problems with accommodating people with disabilities. I want to ask you specifically how the Red Cross is incorporating groups that represent people with disabilities now in the disaster planning process, if you could briefly.
Sure. In the interest of time, I'll try to give you one example. We've partnered with a group called the National Disability Rights Network. Frankly, we don't have the expertise in-house to know what the needs are for all persons with disabilities. Pursuant to their advice, recently we purchased 8,000 cots that are more accessible. We also purchased commodes and other types of devices that should prove beneficial the next time we have that type of disaster.
Well, thank you. I wanted to get that on the record because I've heard from a number of disabilities groups, groups representing people with disabilities, saying that you've been very responsive. In fact, you even called my office for suggestions of groups to include in the planning process. As you know, Congressman Langevin and I chair the Bipartisan Disabilities Caucus. And so thank you for your efforts on behalf of those people.
We appreciate your help, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Neal is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've had great testimony this afternoon, but I want to speak about one of the difficulties that some charities have in offering assistance to segments of our communities. I'd like to direct my question to Dr. Boris. Recently, I've been discussing many of these issues with one of my constituents, Lowell Putnam, who runs his family scholarship fund, and it's existed for decades. I believe his family lineage traces back as the only Catholic family that signed the Declaration of Independence. The Putnam family is really an institution in Western Massachusetts, and I think the same could be said for a lot of other communities around the country. Family charities can certainly help to provide the connection to local concerns and needs. Ms. Boris, what has been your experience with family-run charities?
There are many, as you said, that are all over the country, large and small. My experience is they really reflect the values of the donors. Often families, whole families get behind, for example, a family foundation, which this sounds like, to meet the needs, and especially in scholarships. Many of the small foundations do a lot of scholarships. So my experience has been they've been very important to their local communities. And some of the larger foundations are also family foundations, and they do more international or national work. So I would say they are part of the framework of philanthropy throughout the country.
Just another thought. Mr. Putnam has expressed to me at a couple of intervals his concern that there's, under the recent changes in the law, it's more difficult for them as a family to have some influence on how the scholarships are actually parceled out.
I think some of the new regulations have been put in place to avoid people benefiting their own families with their own philanthropy, and that may make it a little more difficult. But I think that there are ways to put processes in place so that the scholarships, just as an example, can be given to disinterested, outside of the family group.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you for looking into this, and we want to address some of the concerns raised by family charities under the new Pension Act requirements. But at the same time, we want to foster the good work of those that are involved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Neal. Mr. Becerra, now recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And my understanding is that we will be coming back to ask further questions, and we thank the panelists for their testimony.
We plan to come back if members of
Mr. Chairman, your microphone is not on. Your microphone is not on. I don't know if they heard what you just said.
I said we will come back.
Yeah.
And
we're hoping that the panelists can stay, and we understand if they can't, but very interesting subject. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing. To all those who testify, thank you very much. I will withhold any questions. I will make a couple quick points, and since we will have a chance to come back in some 30 minutes, we can hopefully talk further. One, I'm very interested in following up on what I think is an important activity that goes on with our charitable organizations. That is the giving that's growing, but I think unfortunately not growing fast enough into communities of need. Many have compared this to the redlining that occurred in the financial services industry, and I think a number of us want to make sure that we encourage people to make charitable contributions and encourage entities to establish themselves as charitable organizations. But many of us also believe that when only a third of the money that is given for charitable purposes goes ultimately towards helping those who are poor or needy, and we know that 2/3 of those poor or needy live in principally minority communities, something is wrong, and there are lots of folks taking advantage of a tax break, and we have to do a better job since government hasn't been able to do it all by itself. But we know that there are organizations like the Ford Foundation. Ms. Bareford, you deserve a mighty congratulations on the work of the foundation in trying to target well and do the job of helping communities that really are looking for that opportunity. So I'm hoping that we'll have a chance to come back to ask some questions. I know, Mr. Brown, that Red Cross is making changes and trying to address a number of the needs that surfaced as a result of Katrina, but there are many things that we have to talk about, and I hope that you'll give us that chance to ask those questions. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
The committee will stand in recess for 15 minutes, and we will go and vote, and we'll be right back. Some of my colleagues are saying it may be a little longer than 15. We near the end, so it will be between 15 and 20 minutes. We'll be back. So pace yourself and be patient with us.